talks to Moses. Not through an angel. He doesn't talk to Moses through a prophet. But God is talking directly to him and tells Moses what he is thinking and how concerned he is about the oppression of his people. And God's thoughts can be best summed up in one verse that we read, and that's verse 7. So let's dissect verse 7 for a minute. Verse 7 starts off, God tells Moses, I have seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. God is telling Moses that I've seen the people being hurt in Egypt. He has seen the beating to the point of death. Just like Moses saw that man, that Egyptian man beating one of his brethren, he has seen the impact of slavery for almost 400 years, has seen how the oppression of the people has caused the Israelites to lose track of who they were and who they belong to. But it is no different than what is happening today. God has surely seen the suffering of black and brown people in the United States. He has seen time and time again, man after man have been put down and slaughtered at the hands of the taskmasters, at the hands of the oppressors, or what we call today some of the criminal law enforcement officials. And I say criminal because not all law enforcement officials are bad, but the ones who did the things that we're talking about in the news are criminal. Their actions are criminal. One of the first times that we've had a close look at this type of action was when we saw for ourselves a young man named Michael Brown. He was accosted by the police and shot in the street. Yes, we were watching all of this on television. We saw it over and over again, but you know what? God was watching too. Then in 1991, when the home video cameras were just something new, they're kind of a new phenomenon, we saw Rodney King when he was only 25 years old, a black man. He was pulled from his car by police officers for speeding. 4 officers got out, put him on the ground, and severely beat him in the middle of the street. Yes, again, we saw it on television. We watched it over and over again. But you know what? God was watching too. Yet then in 2006, we saw Sean Bell, who was celebrating an upcoming marriage. And after his bachelor party the night before his wedding, he comes out of the nightclub and the police mistake him and his friends for other people and he had done nothing wrong. When the police saw him, they shot him and 2 of his friends over 50 times, killing him and severely injuring his friends. We saw it on television. But you know what? God saw it too. I bet you forgot about this one. In San Francisco in 2009, on New Year's, a young man named Oscar Grant was being detained by police. He was unarmed, laying flat on his face, just like the one we saw the other day. He continued to scuffle with the police, and all of a sudden, one of the officers stood up and shot him right in the back. And he later died from that bullet wound. Yes, we saw that on television too. But you know what? God was watching too. We all remember Trayvon Martin was walking home from a convenience store after buying soda and a bag of Skittles. Then out of nowhere, a wannabe cop decided that he must be a criminal, and he decided to chase him. And he shot him dead in between 2 dark houses. We saw this story over and over again. But you know what? God was watching too. Then in Ferguson, Michael Brown and a friend was doing nothing more than walking down in the middle of the street, and an officer approached them and a struggle broke out through the window of the police car. This young Michael Brown was then shot. The police follows him in the street, and he shoots him 6 more times until he's dead. Yes, we saw that police video too. We saw that story play out over and over again, but you know what? God saw it too. Now, people, don't get me wrong. I don't want to act like the police officers don't have a dangerous job. I understand there are dangerous people out in our communities, in the community in general. I understand that, but black and brown people are killed 2.5 times more than white people by the police. And we only represent 18% of the entire population of the United States. That's like putting 10 people in a row and deciding if you're going to beat any one of those 10. That's like those 2 out of 10 being beaten almost 3 times more than the other 7. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. We've seen the story play out time and time again. We've seen the abuse, the battery, the beatings, the torture, time and time again. But God has been watching, and God has seen it too. It could have been me. It could have been one of my boys. It could have been one of our church members. It could have been one of your classmates. God has seen this time and time again. We have seen this time and time again, and every time I see it, my heart drops. I get a little angry within myself. You know, it's gotten to a point in our lives that we can see this type of violence against black and brown people time and time again, and we don't expect anything to be done about it anymore. We don't expect the police to be arrested. We don't expect the police to be convicted. We don't expect any of that. But this time there was something different. The police kneeled on this man's neck. And then he kneeled down on his back and suffocated him. And suffocated the life right out of George Floyd. Something happened in our nation. Something clicked in the psyche of the people, and it's mostly the young people. When they saw this, something different happened. It was on the news. They saw it on the internet, on their computers. They saw it on the television. They even watch it on the cell phones. Amen. But you know what? God is watching too. So just like the Egyptians, God is telling America today, I have seen the afflictions of my people. I have seen what you've been doing to my people. It was a people that were in slavery. And God said, I have had enough, and I'm coming down to do something about it. Amen? Point number 2. After God told Moses that I've seen the affliction, God now tells him, I have also heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. So what he's saying is I've heard them crying out because of what the Egyptians have been doing to them. God is speaking to Moses. He says, not only did I see the oppression, but I heard the cry of the people because of the brutality that they've been suffering, because of the mistreatments, because of the Egyptians' sinful ways. He has heard their cries. You see, God hears the plea of those who have been oppressed. Because like he hears the voice of those who are being mistreated in the United States. He hears us. He heard the voice of 18-year-old Michael Brown when he said, I don't have a gun, but they still shot him in the middle of the street. On the video, we heard it, but God heard it too. We heard the voice of John Crawford III, a 22-year-old African-American man who died in 2014 after he was shot in Walmart for holding a BB gun on his shoulder. He held it and said to the police, it's not real. It's not real. But they didn't listen to him. They shot him dead right there in Walmart. On the video, we heard that's what he said. But God heard him too. We heard the voice of Derek McDade, a 24-year-old black man who died in 2012, a college student, unarmed, and after being confronted after a fake 911 call, someone called a fake called saying that this young black man was causing problems. And when the police showed up, this young man, McQuaid, said, "Why did you shoot me? Why did you shoot me?" We heard his voice, his last voice, on the radio. But God heard it too. Again, in 2012, we also heard the voice of Eric Gardner, his last cry. He was just 29 years old. He was being choked to death for selling loose cigarettes in New York.
Amen.
When the police came, they started to scuffle with him, and they put him in a chokehold, and he cried out, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." Yes, we heard Eric Gardner, and God heard him too. Yet again, we heard the last words of Amado Delio, a 22-year-old man shot 41 times after he was mistaken for a serial rapist. Delio said to his mother, "Mother, I want to go to college. I'm going to college." But those were his last words. We heard you, brother. But you know what? God heard him too.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Both, but men are not the only ones who are afflicted by these plagues of violence. This plague within our community called police brutality. We also heard the last voice of Tanisha Anderson. She was 37 years old. It happened in 2014. She died after being restrained by bad police officers. She suffered from heart disease and mental illness. And we heard Miss Anderson. We heard her cry out in pain. We heard her say, "Why are you doing this?" Then she was dead. And God was listening. So the question is, how many young people, how many old people, how many black people, how many brown people, how many white people have had to be killed by criminal law enforcement officials? And how many times do we have to see the brutality and hear the last words of so many citizens wrongly killed? Because we have heard their cry, and God have heard their cry as well. Yes, God is listening. I don't know if you realized it, but police departments are not required to even keep records of their shootings. Instead, the nation's 17,000 law enforcement agencies are supposed to report or self-report any officer-involved shooting. They don't think that we've been listening, but we've heard the voice of these young men. We've heard the voice of these young women, and God has heard their voices as well. So I'm telling you here today, when you hear the last words of these men and women, you may hear them say, "I love you." We may hear them say, "I can't breathe." We may hear them say, "Mama, help me." We may hear them say or cry out, "Please, please." We may hear them say, "My hands are up." Or say, "I don't have a weapon. I didn't do anything wrong. Oh, please stop." Or you may simply hear them scream out in pain. We hear it so many times that we've become immune to their cries for help, to their cries for justice, to their cries for fairness. We've heard it so many times like it's no one to listen. We have seen these like none other person is hearing. But I tell you today, in Exodus chapter 3, verse 7, God is hearing every voice of the oppressed people. Every sound, every cry out in pain. We know God is hearing them too. So finally, the final point, and God said later in the last part of just one verse, verse 7, "For I know their sorrows." God is telling Moses that he knows the sorrows of the people. He knows about their suffering. He tells Moses that he is concerned about the suffering of the Israelites in Egypt. He knows and is concerned about their cries, of the cries of his people. He is concerned about what he has seen going on in Egypt. He knows and is concerned about the oppression. He knows and is concerned about the mistreatment. He knows and is concerned about their cries for help. Yes, God knows and he is concerned about the sorrows of the people. So when we take a look at what is going on in our nation today, we see misery. We see pain of the people slaughtered in the street, in the jails, in the back alleys of America. We see it too. We've seen it with our own eyes. We've seen it on the cameras. We've seen it in the police cameras. We've seen it on the computer. We've seen it on the television sets. We've seen it on our cell phones. And you already know if we've seen it, then God has seen it too. But not only has he seen it, he's heard their cry as well. He has heard them crying out because they're taskmasters. God has heard them say, "Help me, Lord, help me." He has heard them say it on the television. He's heard them say it on the police radio. He's heard them say it on the cell phones. He's heard them say it on the police car speakers. He's heard their cry because of the bad police officers, because of the unrighteousness, because of the illegal practices like racism, because of oppression, because of domination, because of all the wrongdoing. Yes, God has heard them, he has seen them, and he knows about their suffering. He knows their pain. God knows. God is saying that he is concerned about their suffering, and God is concerned. If God is concerned, then we have to be as concerned as well. As Christians, we should be very concerned about what we see. So understand, just because we've seen it over and over again, and although we've heard their cry over and over again, it's easy to become conditioned about what is happening. We find ourselves looking at videos, looking at something that a person could have done to de-escalate. Do you ever find yourself looking at these situations on the television and saying, if only he had kept his hands up, if only he didn't run away, if only he didn't talk back, maybe he would be alive? Do you find yourself doing that? Well, that's not right. A police officer shouldn't shoot you just because you put your hands down. You shouldn't be shot and your life ended just because you decided to talk back to somebody. You shouldn't be snatched out of a car and tased just because they didn't think you move quite fast enough. We have to decondition our minds, and we have to understand the basis of what's really right and what's really wrong. We have to stop protecting bad police officers. Bad police officers are weak officers. They're scared officers. In the event there is an officer that is doing bad things and making bad mistakes, then it's the duty of the good officers to point them out, to root them out, to pick them out, to put them up front, and to get rid of them. And if they, as good officers, are not willing to do that, then they are put in the category of the bad officer. There is no other way to address this. There is no other way for for man to address it. But I'm telling you here today, God is concerned. In verse 7, he's telling us, I know about and I am concerned about their suffering. So if God is concerned, we all need to be concerned as well. Concerned about Eric Gardner. We need to be concerned about George Floyd. We need to be concerned about Michael Jones and all those young men and women that we discussed earlier here today. God knows about it. God is concerned about it. So what is God telling us about what he's seeing, about what he's hearing, and what he knows? God is telling us what will happen next. Well, I'm glad that you asked. What will happen next? We can find the answer of what's going to happen next in the very next verse. Let's take a look at what it says. Verse 8. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land unto a good spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites and the Jebusites. I tell you today that this God, the one who we are reading about in the Bible, is the same God yesterday. He's the same God today, and he is the same God that will be forever. And way back then, he was concerned enough to come down from his mighty throne in heaven to save the lives of his people known as the Israelites. So there is no doubt in me that he is concerned enough to save the lives of black and brown people, of poor people, and the other oppressed people in the United States. God has heard their cry. He has seen their suffering, and he knows and is concerned about their oppression. And now, he is saying that he will come down himself and bring them out of this oppression, out of misery. Do you realize America is the richest country in the world by far? There is no reason we should have poverty. There are some countries, like in Dubai, it's an oil-rich country, no bigger than the state of California. No, it's much smaller than California, probably about the size of Alabama. But they have so much money that they give their citizens money. There is no poverty there. There's no reason we should have poverty. No reason that we should have hungry people walking when you have people making billions and billions of dollars. No reason for a lack of college education. There's no reason for it. But I tell you today that God will come down from his throne. He's going to put the brakes on the economy of the entire world. As a matter of fact, he's already done it. The virus has shut down all the countries, especially this one. Everyone is now at home watching television. And what did they see? God was telling you, you're going to watch this. You're going to see how the police officer put his knee on the neck of George Floyd. We see what's going on in the land. He heard this man's cry. We saw him being oppressed. And we know that people are suffering, people are hurting, people are being killed. And there's no wonder why this year, 2020, has played out the way it has. What we've seen is God in action. God has shut down the world. God has made us all sit at home. God has gotten our attention. God has shown the world the suffering of the oppressed. He has allowed us to hear the cry of all the young people going out and say his name. I can't breathe. God has made us sit down and see this. He is telling you that he knows of their suffering and he is genuinely concerned. We know the rest of the story. We do not have to guess what happened. Egypt lost their primary workforce. The economy collapsed in Egypt after the slaves left, after the Israelites left. Even though they were the most powerful country at the time, that's what happened to Egypt. Egypt suffered from many plagues. They had many diseases come through Egypt while God was trying to get the king, the Pharaoh, to release the Israelites. The water went bad. The water turned to blood. All the fish died in the river. The livestock died. Frogs and flies brought sickness and disease to the people. And a large population of the people died.
Amen.
Most importantly, the firstborn all died off. Simply because that king did not want to listen to what God had to say. Yes, we know this story, but it appears that our country has forgotten this story. Here's the main point. God is moving in our country. We now have a pandemic that is all in our homes. We We can watch each step of the brutality. We can see the young men and young women suffering, just like the sign on our church today. There's one thing we need to know, that God is in control. God told Moses he has come down to rescue his people, and believe now that he has come down again because he does not like what he's seeing. He sees the oppression. He sees the domination of the government. He sees the brutality. He sees the hurt, the pain, the poverty, the hunger, the abuse, the violence, the pain, the cries and the suffering. It appears that we have just a few more chances to get it right. So you might be asking, preacher, so what do we have to do to get it right? What is needed for us to get this thing right, family? Right, finally? Well, it's also found in the story. God told Moses on the top of a mountain what needed to be done. God told him 10 things that the people had to do to get right. But we can sum them up in just 2 things. And it's called the summary of our Decalogue. He told them, what you need to do is you need to love God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your strength. This is the most important commandment. But the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Meaning that you love somebody. If you're going to arrest them, you're going to treat them with dignity and respect. Even though they may have been a lawbreaker, you treat them with dignity and respect. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. The story is over. The mystery is solved. You have to love God, and you have to please him, and treat everybody else with respect, dignity, and kindness. If we follow just these commandments of God, there won't be any more police brutality. There won't be any more suffering. There won't be any more hunger nor oppression. There won't be any more crime. There won't be any more backbiting or plain old meanness towards one another. Follow God and love your neighbor. It's just that simple. So at this point, we're going to open up the doors of the church. I want you all to think about it. Do I love God with all my heart, with all my mind, and with all my strength? Do you really love him? And do I love my neighbor? Do I see someone and look right through them and right past them? If I see someone on the side that is hungry, that needs a meal, will I go buy them a hamburger from McDonald's or Burger King or Kentucky Fried Chicken? Will I give them a meal? Or do I just look at them and think to myself, if he can stand there, then he can also work? I'm reminded about a story. A man was in church. He was we'll call him a deacon. So you know it wasn't an AM meeting. This deacon gave money every Sunday. He gave money to the church. He would always make sure it was a bright new crisp $100 bill. And he would put it in the plate. And everybody would see him, and everybody knew he was a good tither. And he always said that he loved God, and he always prayed, and he did all the things that good people do in the church. But one day he left the church, and he was driving home, and he came to an intersection. And there was a man holding a sign, said, "I will work for food." And the guy looked at him, and he said, "Well, if you can work for food, why don't you get a job, you bum?" And he started laughing. And as he drove through the four-way stop, he didn't see a cement truck coming. And the cement truck hit him, and it hit the man. And they both died. And they had to stand before God. And God asked him, said, "Do you think you need to be here?" And he looked over to the right hand of God, and he saw that old man sitting there. He said, "Before you ask that question, I want you to know that I am not a bum. And you can plainly see that I do have a job. So you got to be careful. You never know when God or angels are among us. You take care of the sick. We take care of the homeless. We take care of the widows and the orphans. It's all in the Bible. We're supposed to do that. So if we have anyone right now, anyone here that is not a baptized believer, now is your time. Raise your hand and we will come and we will minister to you and we will welcome you into the fellowship of the church. Are there any? If we have any online, any on the telephone, please call back and let us know. And we will bring you into the fellowship of Christian love. Yes. At this time, if we have none, we will begin to prepare for our Lord's Supper, our Holy Communion.
I said, I heard somebody call my name. Oh, my Lord, oh, my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do? It sounds like Jesus. Somebody call it by name. Oh, it sounds like Jesus. Somebody call it by name. It sounds like Jesus. Somebody call it my name. Oh, my Lord. Oh, my Lord. What shall I do?
Amen. Amen. As we begin our communion service, I'll ask if anyone in the parking lot does not have a communion set, a cup. If you do not, please raise your hand. We have one right over here in the fort, and we have one over on the other side over there as well.
Glory, you got him. I'll take him.